Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's People and Culture meeting. It's an extraordinary one. So I've had two apologies for absence. That's Councillors Bromley and Brown. I think everybody else is here on the list. Good. And now on to emergency evacuation procedures, which Vaughan is going to describe to us.
Good morning, members, colleagues. There are no fire alarm tests planned for today, so if the fire alarm does sound, if we can leave the building, there's an exit at either end, annotated by the green sign, and then we'll down onto the main concourse outside the front of the building, and the congregation point is at the front of the main building. So if it does happen, we'll ensure everyone's outside, and then we can congregate there. Thanks.
Thank you. And on to declarations of interest, of which I've had two.
Yes, Chair. So for item 6, which is the ratification of temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer appointments and recruitment process, temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer Jenkins, who's to your right, has declared an interest in this item. I'm not proposing to ask him to leave the room unless members think that's appropriate. And then item 10, the Chief Fire Officer objectives. Obviously, the Chief Fire Officer is directly involved in that paper, and at that point, other attendees will be asked to leave so that members can have a one-to-one with the new Chief Fire Officer.
Thank you, Clerk. And on to public access, of which we've not received any public access requirements, which is good, or not good, because we should be getting some interface. And on to Chair's business, and I'd like to confirm that this People and Culture meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting due to continuing prevalence of COVID-19. We are continuing to be sensible and limiting the number of attendees at meetings. For this reason, we are recording this meeting for public to view, whereas before COVID committee meetings were not recorded. I'd like to move on to ask the members to actually introduce themselves. So if we go round, yes, please.
Councillor Ruth Jacobs.
Councillor Ruth Jacobs, North Somerset, Wixon Lawrence and St George's.
Councillor Don Davis, Peel Ward Council of North Somerset Council and Vice Chair of the Authority.
Councillor Brenda Massey from Bristol, Southmead Ward, and Chair of the Fire Authority.
Adam Monk from South Gloss Council, I represent the Filton Ward.
Richard Tucker, Western-super-Mare Milton, North Somerset Council.
Councillor Brian Hopkinson, District Councillor of South Gloucestershire, representing Charlton Hayes and Cribs Causeway.
And I'm Councillor David Wilcox, representing Lockleys Ward in Bristol and Chair of People and Culture. I should have probably done that first. Apologies. And now we'll move on to our introductions of the officers, please.
Good morning, Amanda Brown. I'm the Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Good morning, I'm Angie Feeney. I'm the Director of Corporate Services here at Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Good morning, Steve Gregory, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, I'm Bowen, Project Services Assistant.
Good morning, members. Simon Shilton, your Chief Forester and Chief Executive.
Good morning, Vaughan Jenkins, Temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer, Service Delivery Support and Lead Director for People and Culture.
Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to advise on the voting requirements, where I'll be taking extensions and then any negatives, and then a show of hands for all votes. So then we can move on to the first item of the agenda, which is the ratification of temporary appointments to the role of Assistant Chief Fire Officer and the appointment process for a substantive ACFO. And Amanda's going to lead on that one.
So thank you, Chair. I will start off the paper, then if there are any points for clarification, then the Chief Fire Officer will assist. So the purpose of this paper is to, as this is the first opportunity since the 1st of April, for you to ratify the temporary appointments which have been made to cover the role of Assistant Chief Fire Officer, which was the role that Simon previously occupied. So the first temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer is here today, Vaughan Jenkins, and he will be in place for 3 months, and then replaced by David Pike for another 3-month period. The other purpose of this paper is for you to go through in terms of the advert and job description for the role and the process that we intend to follow for that recruitment process. So you're being asked to ratify the two appointments as a 2A and B, approve the job description and person specification for the Assistant Chief Fire Officer vacancy. So as I said, Simon was appointed as your new Chief Fire Officer on the 1st of April, so he made the temporary appointments decision straight away, and this is the first available meeting that you've been asked to ratify those appointments. The appointment that we need to make for a new Assistant Chief Fire Officer will be under the Gold Book Terms and Conditions of Service. So that includes the requirement to provide cover under the Principal Officer rota. There is a section of the report which outlines the financial implications, so you will see that the Assistant Chief Fire Officer is paid a percentage of the salary which is fixed for the Chief Fire Officer, and that's set out at paragraph 4.1, and that was recently approved at one of your recent Fire Authority meetings when you went through the pay policy statement and the pay review for the Chief Fire Officer. The only thing to notice about that is the pay award for January 2022 has not yet been announced by the National Joint Council, so that will happen in due course. Key considerations in the paper, I don't intend to take you through them all, but needless to say, if you approve the job description and advert today, the intention is for that to be placed on the NFCC website tomorrow. So there's a good reason why we make a decision today, so we can get it open as soon as possible. Then the selection process will consist of the stages set out in paragraph 5.3. So the national advert, the application form and CV itself are considered as part of shortlisting. There's a stakeholder engagement forum which includes both external representatives but also a staff member as well. A business continuity exercise, and then obviously a final presentation and interview to members of People and Culture. So I will be in touch with members in due course to get members together for that. One thing to note that during last year, Avon Fire and Rescue Service did engage professional headhunters. They were unsuccessful in finding any external applicants, and HAR have therefore advised that in their experience, the assistant role normally attracts a number of applications, and they would suggest that the NFCC advert would be sufficient in this instance, and they wouldn't recommend that we spend money on professional headhunters for external applicants. The timeline is set out at paragraph 5.7, so you will see the advert will be placed tomorrow. The closing date will be about a month or so later, so 21st of June. That enables us to get papers put together for you members to conduct your shortlisting on the 1st of July. So obviously we have to get papers to you a week in advance. And then the dates are set out for the other stages with a view to an appointment, hopefully on the 1st of October 2022. I think I'll hand over to Simon in case I've missed anything, but I think that's all I need to run through at this stage.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Members, the format of the selection process follows the format that we did last year for the appointment of Assistant Chief Officer Steve Emery, in which we developed a talent pool. And the two colleagues, so Vaughan and also David, will be part of that talent pool and will be entering the process at the point of the final point, which is the interview by yourselves as the People and Culture Committee, given the time frames that have already gone through those different elements of the selection process. So that will allow the opportunity for the authority to increase and expand the talent pool so that you can assure yourselves that you're having the best possible pool of candidates that are available out there, including Vaughan and David as well. I think I draw your attention to the job description, which is again taken from last year. And last year's advert and was refreshed last year as well, and the various qualifications and experience alongside the job advert for your information and approval. I think other than what Amanda's covered, I'll pause there, Amanda, in case there's any questions from members.
I think I had one question from the chair about the job description. Did you want to raise that?
Yes, actually, it was two things in the job description. One of them was I'd like to see a reference to contributing to the HMIC RFS audit in there, and also a better description of the fact that they need to be on call. It is mentioned in 5.6, but I think it needs to be explicitly called out that the role does require you to be on call for specific periods.
So I have had a think about the HMI CFRS point, and where it might fit quite well is at paragraph 2.6 of the job description. It says as follows: to assist the authority in creating a culture of continuous improvement which meets the requirements of the community statutory assessment and external scrutiny. I would suggest we just say including HMI CFRS. Yes, so that would cover that one. It's just a matter for you where we need to add the duty principal officer rota.
Possibly under the managerial aspect, but that's a consideration on where it might best fit in terms of
Okay,
the JD.
but we can take that away as an action.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Any other questions? Councillor?
So I recognise we want to include Vaughan, and I forgot his colleague's name, sorry. And I understand why we want to involve them at the interview stage. Given that the other candidates will be conducting the Stakeholder Engagement Forum and the Business Continuity exercise, and those scores will be collated and passed to the interview panel, I appreciate Vaughan and his colleagues have done that exercise in the past, but they will be, if we're using those scores from a previous time, that will be from a different.
Can I suggest, Vaughan, would you mind maybe stepping out just while we get into the weeds of this, if that's okay?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Vaughan, I'm comfortable for you to stay because I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to your face. No. No, I didn't mean to embarrass him. So my question or observation is simply that we will get scores based on one business continuity exercise, and it won't possibly be the same business continuity exercise, so it could potentially be scored differently, and that could either be in their favour or it could be to their detriment. And so, given how important, with regards to feedback, so on and so forth, that we're trying to use a balanced scorecard, I'm just looking for what consideration has been given to ensure.
Certainly, I hope I can give you some assurance there. It is the same business continuity exercise because I think it's robust and sufficient for their.
So as long as we are comparing apples with apples.
Yes, and I'll be on the panel of assessors for that particular element, which I was previously as well.
Thank you, Don. Yes, you wanted to come in.
I mean, I want to come on something else actually, but I want to come in on that. I mean, I'd rather support Adam's point because, I mean, when we did I think Brenda did this, when we did the Chief Fire Officer one, there was a member of the Fire Authority at the business continuity. I think it was you, Brenda, wasn't it? So I guess the question... Yeah, so was any member of the Fire Authority at those assessments of Vaughan and others?
Not for the Assistant Chief Officers, but we can include that because it is a part of the scenario, is a briefing to the Chair of the Fire Authority, which would be a similar process to what happened with the Chief Officer selection process, rather than part of the formal assessment panel, as part of the scenario in what you'd expect at that level with regards to a briefing to authority members.
I mean, my concern then is it isn't a level playing field in the sense that, you know, if anything goes wrong, it'll be one of us that's in front of the media explaining why something's gone wrong, as opposed to, you know, our HR team. I mean, Andy, I'm not going to go, but I mean, in terms of the responsibility, we are elected to be represented. So I think if we have not followed the same process all the way through on the same day, I do feel rather uncomfortable that I know it might be the same exercise, but I do think we need to follow the same rule for all.
I agree, and myself and Head of HR have had discussions already on this very topic with the Chief, and the problem we've had is that the process for the assistant chief role that was followed last year, which Vaughan entered, was tweaked slightly for the chief fire officer campaign. But what we've agreed is we're going to go back to the way it was conducted for the assistant chief. So there can be no suggestion that there's a more refined recruitment process. So you have some people going under one and others going under another. So we feel assured that exactly the same process will be followed.
Yeah, the assessment process is exactly the same regardless of the scenario. So you're assessing the same abilities and capabilities and qualities of the candidate. So the consistency is in the marking criteria and judgments that you use, but also the fact that from my own personal attendance at those will also provide that consistency in consideration to those qualities and attributes and approaches by the candidates in how they deal with a particular scenario. So they're quite generic headings in terms of how they manage risk, both corporate risk, manage personnel, policy, procedure, etc.
But I'm still not quite sure that you've answered my question, because I think the issue for me is, you know, when you're on your camping holiday in the north of Scotland, which is completely uncontactable by electronic means, and the ACFO we recruit is on duty and there's a major incident, I do think the thing about the member involvement for me is as key as for the CFO is for the ACFO, because essentially we've got to be able, from an operational point of view, to interleave them. So if one is on duty, I mean, perhaps I'm rather milking this point, I don't know, but I don't feel happy that we haven't had that because this is, for me, that's the key thing. Like we can say, you know, at the interview, you know, where we are with the discussions, but that bit, the kind of the operational bit for me is a pretty important part of where we are. And I do think from a governance point of view, we do need to be involved. I've got one other question before I'll shut up, is in the advert, it only says that you want people from the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Why? If I was a fire chief in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, would I not be just as skilled at doing this as somebody just from, or Ireland, just from the UK? So are we making it just too tight for ourselves in that regard?
There is a possibility that we could open it up internationally, absolutely, but the UK FRS statutory responsibilities are quite different in terms of any international criteria that different fire and rescue services around the world might operate to. There is no reason. We have, you know, there has been examples where it's been opened up worldwide, international, and where candidates have been considered. Generally, though, the strongest candidates normally come from the UK FRS sector because of their familiarity of the legislation, etc. But there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't widen that pool, Don, at all.
Brenda, I think you want to come in.
Yes, I'm just reflecting on some of the discussions we've had previously, and I'm wondering whether, in the interest of being absolutely open and transparent, whether we should not perhaps put all the candidates through the assessment process, the entire assessment process, just to be absolutely certain that there's, apart from not spilling my coffee, it's very clear whoever comes out at the end has been assessed in exactly the same way as all the other potential candidates.
Thank you. One of the reasons why we made the decision to provide, with the talent pool, is provide a buy. That runs comparatively to other assessment processes. And of course, if we were to put both Vaughan and David back through the same process again, they could be considered they have a slightly more of an advantage because they're familiar with the scenario, certainly from the business continuity, because it's the same scenario running, but also in the way that the stakeholder forum might operate. But also it's currency as well. So we're within a 12-month period, which is, like I say, is comparative to what we use with other promotion process and assessment process where staff do sit in a talent pool and they get certain buys on certain elements. We refresh that talent pool and then they go for a final interview for part of consideration for selection. So it does follow what exists already in the organisation.
Can I ask a question at this point? Is there any written documentation of the business continuity exercise for the people in the talent pool? So that we can actually judge how they actually performed in that continuity exercise?
Yes, that was all provided in your packs last year in terms of each of the assessment and their performance, and there is a written statement of assessment with regards to their performance at each of those elements. So we still hold that.
No.
Just a quick follow-up. I think it would be quite useful if at some point we were given the guidelines for how somebody ends up in the talent pool and what exactly that is. Because we've talked about it quite a lot, but I don't actually remember ever seeing anything written down that said you will be considered to go in the talent pool because X, Y, Z. I don't think I've ever seen that.
No, again, we can provide you with the narrative from which is consistent with our promotion policies that exist. So, absolutely, what the talent pool actually means, and what it means to the candidates that are in that talent pool as well. Yeah. But sorry, but of course, this is from a principal officer perspective, from assistant chief officer and a chief officer. This is for people in culture to design and agree and approve. So whatever criteria that you may want to put in place for your appointments into the principal officer role is entirely within your gift. However, it is good practice to find an element of similarity and consistency what already exists within the service.
Adam.
So I understand the talent pool bit. I'm sympathetic to that argument. When we were looking to appoint yourself, Simon, we discussed people from a non-fire background because we recognise that command and control is command and control. And part of the reason we had that discussion was there was a concern there wouldn't be enough applicants to create a meaningful competition for the selection. Are we confident that there is a talent pool, predominantly in the UK, but wider across the world, at this level? Because certainly that was our concern when appointing the CEO.
So when you drop down low levels of the organisation, you generally have a wider pool of eligible candidates. So we're reasonably confident that we'll get a level of interest. As an example, we recently nationally advertised our area manager posts. We had one area manager post, we had 10 applications, 7 of which were external, which is very encouraging. If I can make a comparator to other fire and rescue services who have advertised similar sort of roles at the level, they've seen a reasonable talent pool to choose from. I've already had contact from external candidates who are aware that we will be advertising soon for me to have a conversation with them around their interest in joining the service.
Ruth.
Do you think that there's going to be a large number of applicants coming forward? I asked the same question last time, and we sort of said we weren't sure. Do we know?
We never know for sure. I can only go, as I said, of experience and indications from other services who have advertised similar posts, whereas the wider pool of those that may well be eligible is much greater. And so therefore we anticipate as a result of that we may see an increased level of interest. However, it was very, very encouraged, as I said, around the level of external interest at area manager level, who wanted and very keen to come and join our service, which is really, really positive. And I've had 2 conversations already I've got an appointment this Friday with a potential candidate who wants to talk about his interest in joining the service as well. So I'm taking that as good indicators that we're likely to get a reasonable amount of interest.
Certainly, Adam, go ahead.
So I really like the fact that somebody's reached out to you. To me, that's brilliant. I think that's really proactive. And then just going back to the balanced scorecard thing now, is that then giving them an insight that other candidates who are maybe not as comfortable to approach you? I have no issue with that. I personally think anyone who does that is making the best use of resources available to them. That's my view.
Can I just put your mind at rest? Because at the end of the advertisement at Appendix 2, it sets out on the second page, the final stage process of formal interview and presentation. Further information regarding the role or process can be obtained from Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive, so I'm sure. So everybody's invited to contact, and it's up to them whether indeed they do. Yeah, exactly. So I hope that gives you some reassurance.
Brian, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, in processes, two questions. Don came up with this international thing, widening it to international. Would that cause us any problems in relationship to the actual advertising? You know, because once you start advertising outside, you know, is there going to be anybody claiming unfairness because they didn't actually hear about it? So that's the one. And also, also within that, would that actually mean that there's more time involved before, you know, these processes happen? Because obviously we're on a schedule, and it's important that we key to that schedule. The other thing is that with regarding interviews, and I was involved with quite a few interviews, and we did actually split some over a couple of days, and then there were people that weren't able to get to the next meeting because they were ill or whatever. I wasn't involved on the last one, so I'm not sure how that one went. But I was pretty insistent at the time that, you know, we try and make sure, well, we don't actually try, we actually make sure that people are interviewed on the same day, all the people are interviewed on the same day with the same group of people interviewing, because I think otherwise there's a problem. So, you know, as long as that's okay. I would like to comment on the overall report and actually, well, the way which we're doing that. And, you know, historically we've actually seen that there was expense paid to other people to actually get, you know, in interest. We're not going down that route now. We're going to be looking at ourselves rather than having that expense. And I think history actually of doing these things, this is just a general improvement, but actually making sure that we don't, you know, I think it was a really good report. I'm quite happy with it and with what members have said. So.
Councillor, thank you. If I could deal with a couple of your concerns about members being involved in the interview process. So the last two that I've been involved in, so for the Chief and the last Assistant Chief, I've been at pains with Democratic Services to say to members, do not commit to do this unless you can do every stage. So that includes the shortlisting. So it's not just the interviews, it's the shortlisting and then coming in to get the presentation of the interviews. About your comment about can it all happen the same day, that depends on the number of applicants. So sometimes it does have to go over to a second day. So the last one we did, I think, was we had 3 interviews on one day because they take quite a long time because there's a presentation at the beginning followed by an interview, so at least 2 hours long. So to fit in more than 3 in a day would be a challenge. So we had one the following morning. But again, I made very clear to elected members, please don't drop out halfway through. We need to keep the same board. And I think we also ensured we had an extra member in the event that someone was knocked down by a bus or became very unwell. And then we'd still be quorum for those interviews. So that's definitely been taken on board. And I hope to reassure you that that hasn't been a problem as far as I'm aware.
So with regard to the scoring, if somebody actually comes and they're interviewing on the main day and then they're not in on the second day when you've got somebody else in, okay, are the scores from that person deleted who was not able to be in? Because otherwise it's not fair.
Yeah, well, HR are there, so our HR manager, Karen Shaw, ensures fairness. So if that were to, it hasn't happened in answer to your question, but if it did happen, she would give us a solution to make sure. So it may be that member scores will be deleted for the whole 2 days. So I can't give you that reassurance today because it hasn't happened in my experience, but we do have HR in the room to ensure that the process is completely fair.
And Councillor, in relation to your question around international adverts, most of our adverts will be placed on the National Fire Chiefs Council job pages. which is not unusual to see external international companies also advertise on that platform. So it is open worldwide from that perspective. So everyone gets equal access and equal notification at the same time. And in relation to the dates, we will publish the dates as well around expected dates for the different elements of there, and our expectation as each candidate who's applying must be available for those range of dates, because we are quite tight. If we were, meet our expectation, our desire to have a permanent person in post by the 1st of October. So we need to meet those deadlines, particularly when you talk about a successful candidate potentially having to give a notice period to their current employer as well.
The other comment about the international thing is, with the COVID, I watched quite a lot of TV, and I must admit, an interesting scenario came in with police and everything being recruited from different countries, and a completely different attitude coming into being, and it sometimes makes good television or good programs. But I'm wondering whether or not that would actually create problems. To be quite frank with that, my own feeling about it. So
I think members would just need to not prejudge and judge
culture.
everybody on the day.
A different culture.
Yeah.
I have one last question about this. Do we know how many people in Avon Fire and Rescue are actually trained to Gold Book Service Standard? So my implication is that how many internal candidates could we possibly expect to stand up for this role?
So you have obviously Temporary Assistant Chief Officer Vaughan Jenkins and David Pike. It's open to existing area managers. Area managers are generally, from an operational perspective, trained to a level 3 stroke bordering on a level 4, but that's part of their development programme.
Right. So there are only 2 people in Avon Fire and Rescue who are actually trained to proper Gold Book standard?
Well, they'll all go on to a development programme, but the way that we assess their ability to operate in that environment is through the business continuity exercise within the selection process. So it could be open to area managers or existing assistant chief officers.
And is there any plans to expand the pipeline of that so that you do get more people trained up so that they could apply for these roles?
The difficulty for that is that internally they don't operate at that level on a day-to-day basis. So they maintain their competence at their operating mechanism, which at area manager level is level 3. And that's where we test their ability and their potential to operate at level 4 through the selection process.
Right.
So I just have one question, which I think is the question. So how many area managers do we have?
We've got an establishment of 3, but we're running with 5 with some temporary posts which are funded for a fixed term period. Yeah.
So arguably we have potentially 7 internal candidates.
That would be including David and Vaughan. So we know we've got David and Vaughan. Unsure about our existing area managers, whether they're interested or not. A couple of them are temporary, and it is open to existing area managers and temporary. And then, of course, any external candidates as well.
Any other questions before I summarise what I think we've agreed? Okay. So I spotted a couple of changes that I think you have asked for. So the first is looking at Appendix 1, the job description, paragraph 2.6, to add the words at the very end, where it says, and external scrutiny, add the words including HMICFRS.
Suggest we add any peer assessments looking into the future as well.
And any peer assessments.
Yes.
Okay, super. So that's that one. And then we didn't identify where, but it's somewhere in the job description you've asked for reference to the duty principal officer rota. So that to be added in a place to be determined. Is that okay? And then the other matter which was raised by Don and others was in the advert itself at Appendix 2, where it says this post is open to existing area managers, temporary or substantive, and ACFOs within the UK Fire and Rescue Service. We can expand that to any international
or equivalents, suggest equivalents.
International, UK, international or equivalent?
Or UKFRS or equivalent international organisation.
Equivalent. International organisation. Yeah, okay, super. Is everybody happy with those changes? Are there any others that you wanted to propose? Okay, so if we go back to the recommendations, so the committee has asked to ratify the appointment of 2 individuals, Area Manager Vaughan Jenkins of Avon Fire and Rescue Service and Area Commander Dave Pike of Surrey Fire and Rescue Service, to each temporarily fulfil the role of Assistant Chief Fire Officer for a period of 3 months each, covering the period in total 1st of April to the 30th of September. I assume we'll take a vote or something, but that's the first recommendation. The second is approve the job description and personal specification, and it should also say and advertisement, because we've actually changed that, haven't we? And advertisement for the Assistant Chief Fire Officer Agency vacancy, subject to the amendments discussed, and I can put those in the minutes, the amendments that I've just outlined. Do you want to take a vote on this?
I think we'll take a vote on the first 2 bits, and I think we then need to talk more specifically about points C and D, about the selection process. And
sorry, gosh, I completely missed it, went over the page.
I know, reading your notes.
Approve the selection process, and D, approve the commencement of the process. Sorry, you don't want to change those?
Do we actually want to put it to a vote that we want all the candidates to go through the business continuity exercise again? Do I have a proposer for that? Don, and a seconder? Adam. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we'd like to put that to a vote that we want all candidates to go through.
Can I just be clear, because what the paper suggests, or what Simon's outlined, is that the candidates on the talent pool only come back for the interview and presentation stage. We can't just deal with business continuity, so there are other stages, so we need to be clear what you're asking all candidates to go through. So if we go to paragraph 5.3, candidates complete an application form and CV, which is used for shortlisting. Well, everyone will do that again, even those on the talent pool. Are you also saying that everybody should go through the Stakeholder Engagement Forum again and the business continuity exercise again? Bearing in mind, we would then have to do a new exercise. We can't use the old one. We'd have to develop a new one. And also, I think Simon made the point that those people who've already been through the process one might have an advantage by virtue of the fact they've had that experience once. So I just need to be clear what we're saying.
The talent pool was developed by yourselves members to succession planning for temporary appointments, as we're in a position now, following the Chief Officer's process from that. So that allowed the authority and members the flexibility to be fleet of foot, if I will, to be able to backfill on a temporary level whilst you look for a more substantive process. That's what the talent pool was developed for, and that's what we're using Vaughan and also Dave for. Given the proximity of the currency of the process that they'd previously gone through, our normal internal procedures, promotion procedures, is that's current for a period of time, and that normally is current from 12 to 18 months. So if we were going to ask both David and Vaughan to go back through the full process again, that would not be aligned to other, or be consistent with our other principles in which we try to apply, and we try to apply a level of consistency. And again, you'll be asking the candidates to go through virtually the same process which they've done less than 12 months ago. I just want to sort of point that out, really. Hence why we decided that a good starting position they would get a bite at that point, but you would see them again at interview and presentation stage.
Don and Brian?
Well, just for clarification.
I think I'd be unhappy with, as has been explained. I mean, once they've actually gone through that process, to do something similar, they would be well in advance of being able to be practiced on that. I really do believe that we can actually have the process as it's been suggested in here, rather than introducing an extra layer. So,
Well, I mean, I think that's, I don't know. I mean, what if they've gone for a similar job in their own service? They presumably have gone through a business continuity exercise, one would hope, in another interview scenario. So to say that it's unfair, as if these people have not done it before, I think is saying we don't know. The only issue I've got with it, really, and I don't want to overly criticise or comment about the things you've said, Simon, is that my understanding is there was no AFA member involvement in the business continuity exercises. And I do think that we've got to think about this person when they come to duty will be the CFO at times when you're unavailable. I mean, clearly we don't expect you to be 365 days a year available, Simon. You have to have, you know. So if an incident happens when you're away, then they are the CFO, aren't they? So my only concern is around that member involvement in terms of the business continuity. Now, I don't quite know how if you could only do a member involvement business continuity bit as part of it, and get them just to do that, but I'm just a bit concerned that we aren't judging the same. And I am worried about the fact that we ultimately are responsible. We make the decision, and are we judging on a level playing field in terms of that business continuity assessment? That's the only worry I've got. And they've got to do it again. They've got to do it again. I wouldn't assume that applies to a lot of very, very senior roles in public service. I can do the same thing again. I mean, you know, head teachers of schools, for example, I guess do the same thing if they go for various jobs.
In terms of their business continuity exercise and comparators in other service, that might differ. That might differ in terms of the scenario or how that is facilitated. And that's my professional role to assess their ability at that level to deal with operational incidents and an organisational wide impact scenario as well, alongside a fellow assessor from that perspective. If it was members' desire for candidates the talent pool to go through the process, that I think they'll have to go through the full process rather than just one singular element. But my preference and advice is that we recognise the scenario that they've previously gone through, which is not going to be dissimilar to what they're going through again if you ask them to go through the repetition of that. However, I recognise it is a member's decision.
I mean, the thing is, it may not be practical for all the members who are going to make the decisions to be at that initial process. But is that videoed at all, or is it, would we be able to get sort of like a view of that so that we would actually see that? Because then that would mean the process wouldn't have to be done again. But in reality, that would then be open to members to look at and see what happened and judge it from our own perspective, and then go on with from there. I mean, why? It seems to me that may be a more appropriate thing to do.
It is videoed. I could tell you it's 4 hours long for each candidate. It's a 4-hour assessment for each candidate, but it can be videoed. And that can be, as with my own process, member observation as well. I believe there are a number of members that observed my own process. So that again could be an option and available.
I think the point was whether the last two were videoed. I can't recall whether so the point is those in the talent pool, whether they were videoed to compare them to the new ones. I think that was the point.
Don wants to come back.
Can I make a suggestion then? Because we want to move on, we've got other things to discuss. Is that we go with what we've got, but we also create some scenarios in which a selected number of authority members are involved in, which relates to the political, the little P scenario. So everybody that applies does this, and it might only be half an hour long, so it's much more suitable in terms of that part, because actually we wouldn't know, I'm sure, whether the operational work was being done correctly. You would know, because it's your job to know. So, and I wouldn't want to be judging in any way, but I am concerned about the political, the little P involvement. So if we could have two lots of scenarios, one is the operational scenario, which is quite rightly judged by professionals, but there is that member involvement scenario, which it doesn't need to just be long, but I think we feel probably more comfortable as members if the people we were dealing with and selected could answer the sort of questions we may want to ask. Is that achievable?
It certainly is. We can do. We can put something in there around member briefing,
Yeah.
member engagement, absolutely, and where potentially both Vaughan and David who haven't been through that scenario could be included.
Yeah, thank you. Is that a way forward, everybody?
Brenda wants to come in as well.
I was only going to say that with the CFO interviews, I actually sat at home and watched the whole thing on my screen there, which was quite easy to do. And then at appropriate points, the candidates phoned me at home.
I think it was the exercise, not the interviews, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So it is possible to sit there and view what's going on.
I think Angie wants to add something.
My sort of point was actually around kind of Don's one, which is just listening to the conversation, whether there was a possibility for you to get your assurances through the interview process and the expansion of that, or the addition of an additional stage. And that's, I think, what Don has now kind of suggested, because that would seem to balance up all of the different kind of aspects of it and provide the assurance without needing to rerun that business continuity. So just kind of in support of the suggestion.
That's a good point, Andrew. So what we could do at that stage, if members are in agreement, is at the final stage for the presentation and formal interview, we could include in there also a 20-minute political briefing as well. We give each candidate a given scenario, and they come in and brief the panel.
Indeed. Adam wants to come in.
Not trying to drag this out any longer. So I think that's a fair compromise, and I think that's the way forward. But moving forward to stop this conversation happening next time, is there a formal guidance stroke policy document around the talent pool? Because I think from my perspective, I don't doubt the skills of Vaughan and David, but without understanding how they've got there, then that's what's...
I think at the appointment of the last substantive assistant chief officer, the talent pool at assistant chief officer level was something new that was introduced by the authority and the committee at that time, in recognition of the potential to have access for some temporary succession planning from there. And I don't think that actually was 100% written down around what that talent pool means. And certainly if we are going to create a talent pool this time from the current process, then absolutely I think it would be vitally important for us to determine what actually it means within being in the talent pool.
with some with a commitment from the authority to the individuals in that, even if that's just not to create it, but offering development, but B, likewise, so then members understand that they've done this, and as an authority we recognise that they've done this exercise and that's valid for 12 months, whatever, 18 months. I don't mind what it is, but then we're working off something that's measured, aren't we? Thanks.
Brenda?
I think it would be really good to have clear evidence written down to say people are put in the talent pool because of or due to, and have an actual accepted and agreed statement of the rationale for putting somebody in a talent pool. Because at the moment, I don't know why anybody ends up in the talent pool. Well, I mean, obviously it's because they're deemed suitable, but what grounds are used to do that? And just for clarity, so to make absolutely sure everybody understands why, I think that would be really helpful. And maybe, yes, absolutely, and maybe a very small working group to look at it.
Okay. Shall I go back to the recommendations? Because I'm not sure whether the policy needs to be added to the recommendations or not, but several members have mentioned the need for a policy to be developed for talent pools for senior leadership board, I'm guessing, rather than at lower levels. So the recommendations are, first of all, to ratify the temporary appointments. I won't read it out word for word, but that seemed to be the non-controversial bit. The B was to approve the job description and personnel specification. I've put and advertisement for the Assistant Chief Fire Officer vacancy, subject to the 3 amendments I outlined earlier. So one was to include HMI, CFRS and any peer assessments. The other was to include reference to the duty principal officer rota. And the third was open up to applicants within the UK Fire and Rescue Service or equivalent international organisation. So that's that one. And then C was approve the selection process for the substantive appointment. I would suggest we add to that subject to the addition of a political briefing scenario before the interview presentation and interview itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, part of the package.
Okay, super. And then D was approve the commencement of the process to appoint into the vacant position of Assistant Chief Fire Officer. So that will start tomorrow with an advertisement subject to the amendments you've outlined. And then it's whether you want to propose an additional recommendation. Sorry, my microphone's a bit lively. About whether a policy should be developed for a talent pool for members of SLB, or whether you're happy for that to be an internal thing that we work up and bring back to you at some point. That's probably more appropriate. Okay. So shall we just, do you want to take a vote on recommendations A to D as I've just outlined?
Can I have a proposer for that? Don? And a seconder? Adam? Thank you. So we'll take a vote on parts A to D. So any votes against? No. Any abstentions? And votes for, please. So it's unanimous, yeah.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you. We got there. Brilliant. Vaughan's going to be wondering what we've been discussing, right?
Yes. So that's taken the better part of an hour. So apologies for this meeting probably will overrun. To give you due notice. And we might take a comfort break when we go for the exclusion items. So let's move on to the business, fire safety and re-engagement. And Steve Quinton would like to present that one, please. Good morning.
Right, yes, good morning everybody. Steve Quinton, currently the temporary area manager responsible for risk reduction and particularly business fire safety, and here obviously in relation to the paper that I've submitted to yourselves today for a number of considerations. I'm absolutely more than happy to answer any questions in a moment, obviously, and obviously go through the details of the paper. But if I may provide some background to why the paper has come before you today, linking to our sort of succession planning for business fire safety. Members will be aware that obviously the increased pressure and demands on business fire safety teams. As a service, we've invested heavily since our HMI inspection in 2018 and almost doubled what was then the existing fire safety team. The challenge to that is it's a very young team still, and it takes between 2 to 3 years for a fire safety officer to become competent as a level 4 diploma, which is a level 4 diploma allows fire safety officers to inspect high-risk premises. Now, obviously, over time, you become more and more experienced. The more you're out in the field, the more you're inspecting premises. What has changed following Grenfell is the requirement to have third-party accreditation and become more competent, clearly. So that has presented us with a challenge, and that challenge is that because of our recruitment since 2018, we have a considerable number of younger members, or less experienced members of the team, but we're now starting to see some of those older members retire, and hence the paper, because some have retired recently. The challenge for myself and the service board is that in order to meet our legal obligations under building regulations and licensing, our risk-based inspection programme, and you'll be aware through various updates I've given in different forums around that, that presents a corporate risk if we don't look at our succession planning and how we maintain our skill sets. So with the loss of these members of staff, we are able to recruit to bring us back up to our establishment. And currently our establishment is 20, However, we are funded for 21.5, and through conversations with Simon and Board, we're at that level at the moment whilst we're carrying out a piece of work around risk profiling, because there is a view that potentially, once we've completed that work, we might see an increase in our establishment. But obviously, we need to provide the evidence base for that in the first. I suppose I have a personal view that I think we need about 30, but I'm realistic, and I'm not greedy. However, quite rightly, we need to wait for that piece of work. But in the interim, we have a number of senior staff that have left the organisation, and 2, as the paper says, are going for promotion. So the proposal is that we look to support, and hence I'm here today for your support around some re-engagement of some of those members of staff. It would be 4 staff on a part-time basis, which would equal 2 full-time equivalents, and they would be on a fixed-term contract. Because we recognise that, as I've said previously, that it takes a couple of years, 2 to 3 years for those staff we just take on. And that provides us the ability to maintain our legal obligations, ensure we still meet the requirements of our corporate risk, but also we allow the opportunity for the new staff to develop and learn from those more experienced people. However, the challenge around re-engagement, as you'll see from the paper, is around the decisions that need to be made in the delegated authority. Hence, one of the proposals within the paper is that the Chief Fire Officer has the delegated authority for business fire safety only, because I appreciate there are wider implications in relation to this proposal, that on a case-by-case basis, that in relation to business fire safety, where there is an organisational need, the Chief Fire Officer has the decision to allow for a period of re-engagement and also set that fixed period of time for whatever that needs on that case-by-case basis. Hence my proposal here today. So there is a wider piece of work that then needs to be done, and obviously I've been in consultation with Amanda, and thank you for your assistance with regards to the wider bit around the Constitution and the other duties in that way. So that's not for me, and that's not what I'm here. I'm here purely selfishly in relation to business fire safety. So that's the history and why I'm here. So it's really any questions in relation to the paper that you may have around the proposal.
Adam?
So this one's for Angela to make us squirm. So the proposal makes sense, but there was a piece of legislation a while ago, wasn't there? And I think it might be called IR35, it may not be, which was to stop public sector workers returning to their place of employment on as I suspect it's on enhanced terms, but taking retirement and returning. So I have no problem as long as we would be compliant with that. And I can't remember the piece of legislation.
There's a couple of things there. So there was the national framework, which is a fire service specific aspect, and that talks about the principle of not returning. In particular, it was around chief fire officers retiring and then coming back to the service. But it did talk about also applying some of those principles below that, unless there was a particular high-risk operational need. And I think that's what Steve is describing here. Separately, within pension schemes, there are different rules and regulations about coming up. So your principal civil service scheme has those kind of provisions. The firefighter pension schemes have different provisions, which is around abatement of pensions, which this talks about as well. So I'm content from your kind of strategic lead on HR that this proposal here aligns both with the national framework and also with the pension schemes, which are looked at as well, because the proposal in front of you at the moment is limited to business fire safety, where we know we have kind of issues.
If I can just add to that, so I've gone into quite a lot of detail, unusually for me, at paragraph 7 about the legal and policy implications, because you need to be cognizant of the Fire and Rescue National Framework. Now, that is a document which is quite out of date now. It was May 2018, and when the white paper is published, which has the consultation paper has been published today, it may be that this wording in this section is going to change. But currently, I've quoted to you a section from the framework, and what it says is this, as Angie's just alluded to, this is designed to apply to those officers at brigade or area manager or above, but they encourage you to follow the same principles for lower ranks. So when we looked at the recommendations, we deliberately limited it to not only business fire safety, but limited it in rank as well, so that it's under the rank of area manager, so that that wouldn't conflict with the national framework position. The recommendations continue the wording that's quoted in the framework about it needing to be in circumstances where it's in the interests of public safety. So that's why business fire safety is the department it applies to, because those are the ones who are inspecting these high-rise buildings, which is directly connected to public safety. So as your clerk, I've scrubbed the recommendations in such a way to make sure they're tight, and we're not giving a wide delegation, you're giving what the framework had in mind. But also at recommendation D, you will see that I've recommended that the delegation's only in place for so long as we can do a review of the Constitution itself by the Constitution Working Group and have a look at what amendments need to be made to the Constitution, because the terms of reference of people and culture will need to be changed, for example, because at the moment it says elected members can only make these decisions, and what we're saying is we'd like Simon to have delegated authority. So I hope the paragraphs at 7 give you some reassurance, but if you have any questions, any further questions, please say.
I think it also appropriate for me to say at this stage, this is a short-term sort of fix, for want of a better word. With the succession planning that we've carried out, we don't envisage this being myself being sat in front of either yourselves or even the Chief Fire Officer asking him for that authority to year on year to make this recommendation. I've not done my job properly then if I've not succession planned appropriately. So this is just because of the current situation. We have some funding available from the Home Office which allows us to do it as well, which I think is really important, and it supports the position of the HMI. But it also supports growth within our department, because as a result of this, we have seen some growth in the team leader position, which I've explained before. So.
Brian?
Yeah. I think it's always a good idea to not throw away intelligence amassed because someone retires. I've seen it in my architectural days with engineers, which were so understanding of how buildings were made and constructed. In the early part of last century, and then were retired, and that knowledge had gone. And it's expensive, training people up. And so I can't see a real problem with this. And having read through, it's a fair way of doing it. But I mean, at the moment, with if you look at government statistics, which are being not government statistics, but statistics which are being shown us on unemployment being at a very low level, more jobs available than there are people, putting themselves on the market. We need to go this particular route. I don't see it as a problem with it. So.
Anybody else? So I've got a question. How many buildings within the Avon Fire and Rescue area actually need this level of audit, and how often do these buildings need to be reassessed, please?
Great question. So I can give you part of an answer. There's also an unknown to this answer as well, and I'll come on to that, and I may have mentioned, so apologies to those that have heard me before in relation to this. But so we carried out a piece of work last year around the building risk review, which focused on buildings of 80 metres plus. And then there was 191 within the Avon area. They are what is deemed as high risk, but they're only residential premises. We know there are a larger number of hotels above 18 metres that also will require inspection. And we also know there's a large number of buildings between 11 and 18 metres that are going to present a challenge to us. Subject to the audit that takes place, they could be reviewed and have to be revisited every 12 months. If they come out as a high risk score, then that could be a 12-month frequency, or it could be up to 4, 5, sometimes up to 10 years. The drive from central government is that we will be all over these buildings, especially existing buildings. New buildings won't be an issue because of the building safety regulator, and we'll have much greater scrutiny over those right at the start. Our challenge is, certainly with the 11 to 18 metres, we don't actually know where they are. And nationally, there is a challenge to that they don't actually know where they are. So this will provide us that ability to carry out that work, but as I say, also to be able to carry on with the other elements of our legal jurisdiction.
Thank you. So speaking as a member of the Audit Committee, are those statistics actually presented to the Audit Committee in terms of risk?
They have been, and they will be on a more regular basis. So part of our changes are around, we have to report that data to the Home Office anyway as part of our quarterly returns. What we're looking at doing, and hence the recent growth in the department through some reorganisation, is around having greater scrutiny. So those figures are now part of the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee, and they will go to the relevant members to hold me to account for the work that my team do. And we all have set targets of what needs to be done in relation to that.
Simon, I think, wants to come in.
Members, just a reminder that also on our first HMI CFRS inspection, business fire safety was an area of concern that was raised to the authority. Steve and other colleagues have worked incredibly hard to build capacity and capability. One thing that Steve is trying to avoid here is a result of skills that take some time to build up. Quite a period of time, skills and experience, particularly in some of them with the fire engineering as an example. Steve is trying to put mechanisms in place to prevent us from running the risk of having an adverse response again from the inspectorate as well. Hence why the paper has come forward to you today for that purpose.
Brian.
Yeah, HMOs. I mean, to be licensed over a certain number, they need fire doors, etc. You know, so many. I mean, is that inspected by the fire authority or just basically by the local authority saying, yes, that's been done in intermittent stirrups, etc., and you're not actually involved, or are you involved?
Yes, we are heavily involved. I don't like being heavily involved sometimes because they are a challenge for us. So HMO is a house in multiple occupation. This is what's come out of following Grenfell, actually, in James Judy Hackett's review, is that there's different bits of legislation that apply to the same building that are enforced by two different authorities, which can be a nonsense sometimes because they can be in conflict. Yes, we are, but we do have a local West of England housing protocol where ourselves and the four unitary authorities follow set guidance, and we have set understanding protocols where we share and we will carry out joint inspections. But yes, that has become more of a challenge as well because of obviously the housing issues that we have. But yeah, we work closely with them on that.
So is every single HMO done on a joint inspection?
No. Depending on the size, depending on how it's used, will determine actually, because the protocol comes with guidance, and there's a document called La Cause Guidance. Depending on where it is within the HMO or the block of flats will determine which authority has the lead. So where possible, and the more trickier ones, we will always do joint, and we prohibited a large premises in Bristol last year. But it doesn't necessarily always warrant a joint inspection. I suppose the comfort I can provide you is that we share that information on a regular basis. So whilst we might not go together, we will always update each other on different actions. So there's that joined up piece of work.
Thank you for that. I feel we might be straying into audit territory there, but Brenda, I think, wants to come in.
I was just going to say that as a member of the licensing committee in Bristol, I think you also have to inspect licensed premises, don't you?
Yes, that's correct, actually, yes. And that's a legal obligation on the service, which sits within our corporate risk. And again, previously highlighted by the HMI in 2018 as an area of concern around building regulations and licensing. What this proposal does is further support our ability to carry on doing that whilst those new members come in. And it's important to say as well, those more experienced members will provide training. The impact of COVID has had a massive effect on the BFS department because we effectively could not do any inspections, even on high-risk premises and care homes and the like. That has meant that the four staff that we took on in 2019, early 20, have been learning from a book. And learning from the book is really, really difficult. You need to physically be out there looking at things. And that has, again, further had an impact, so I would say that whilst they're very keen, their experience out in the field is probably a year to 18 months behind. So this, again, allows us to do that, to meet that obligation.
So Amanda, I think, would like to sum up.
Shall
before
we
move to
go
a vote?
through the recommendations? I haven't heard anything, I don't think, which changes the recommendations. So the committee is asked to approve that A, following a national recruitment campaign and a fair and transparent recruitment process, the Chief Fire Officer has delegated authority to make decisions on the re-engagement of staff under the rank of Area Manager in the Business Fire Safety Team only. This will include decisions on previous employees of Avon Fire and Rescue Service or other fire and rescue services on a case-by-case basis to reduce organisational risk and in the interests of public safety. B, the Chief Fire Officer has delegated authority to make decisions on the length of re-engagement of those staff on a case-by-case basis where there is organisational need in the interest of public safety. C, the Chief Fire Officer will report details of those re-engaged to the People and Culture Committee on an annual basis. Such report will include the reason why the appointment was necessary in the interest of public safety. And D, that the delegation of authority to the Chief Fire Officer is limited in duration until a constitutional working group of cross-party members is convened to consider any amendments required to the Avon Fire and Rescue Service re-employment and re-engagement framework and consequential amendments to the Fire Authority Constitution. So, would you like to take a vote?
So can I have a proposer for those recommendations? Brian? And a seconder, Adam. Thank you very much. So can we move to a vote? So can we have any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes for, please. Thank you very much. So that's passed unanimously.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And thank you, and appreciate your support with this, and thank you to the board as well. Thank you. Thank you.
So the next item is an item for information about the date of the next meeting, which is the 9th of June at 10:30 a.m. here, Police and Fire HQ, which I think we're moving to above the canteen. Isn't that right, Emma? So I'd like to propose that, so I don't think we need to vote on that. And now we'll move on to the exclusion of press and public. That the public be excluded from this meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to the Schedule 12A, Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and that in accordance with the Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'd like to move that we move to an exempt session. So can I have a proposer and seconder? Proposed by Barbara, Brenda, and seconded by Ruth.
I'll speak to you after.
Please do. I like a good thrashing. And so if you could switch off the camera, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.